You've landed inside Launch Street, the Business Innovation Podcast, where we interview top innovators out there shaking things up so you can innovate, differentiate, and get further faster. Since you're here, we know you're the type of person that recognizes the importance of unlocking your innovation advantage so you can compete and win. And now, your host, the person that has worked with leading companies like Disney, Procter & Gamble, Aero Electronics, the U.S. Army Research Labs, and Red Robin on upping their innovation advantage. Tamara Gontor.
Hello, everybody on Launch Street. Tamara here, your host. I just realized I'm whispering. I think it's because it's 4 o'clock in the morning as I'm recording this and the sky's still dark and I'm the only one awake. Or at least it feels like I'm the only one awake. I know I'm not the only one. All right, I'll go back to my normal voice. Isn't that funny that kind of at certain times of the day it just feels like we should go into a whisper? All right, enough of my random tangent. Excited for another killer podcast today. Today we're doing another one of my favorite, I guess, and actually from the feedback, it sounds like it's one of your favorite too, deep dive podcasts. I'm going to deconstruct the myths around strategy. I think it's one of those big words that gets thrown around, and I know a lot of us do strategy wrong. And once I understood how to do a real strategy, one that you could actually implement, in fact, one that was way more strategic, ironically enough, to use that word, I actually started to see the results from the effort behind it. I mean, I think a lot of us set goals and strategies and objectives, and whether we are, leading a team or just for ourselves or the head of a company, strategy is important. And understanding where you're headed is important. But the challenge is most of us are actually doing it in a way that takes us further from our goals or from our objectives, not closer to them. So I want to break it down. I'm going to be here with my good friend Derrick. This is a 2-part series. We've got a couple books that we reference. This is our book club that we kind of bring to life. So Good Strategy, Bad Strategy is one of the books. In fact, it was a game changer book for me. I'll put the link in the show notes. I think you'll really like it. And Rocket Fuel, which is another one to kind of understand the different types of people that you need at kind of the head of a company or the head of a strategy to really get it done. But the one thing I'll say is in this, you'll hear us. It's actually kind of cool because what we do is we deconstruct strategy, good and bad. But on the second part, what's I think even better is I get super real and we actually deconstruct and actually pull apart my strategy. There were some parts of it that actually weren't right or weren't working well enough for me or giving me the right guideposts that I needed to move forward. So we actually break that stuff down too. It's like a live case study. But I think in opening up kind of what our strategy is over here at Launch Street, I think for you, it's going to be tremendously valuable. All right, this is a 2-part series. Here we go.
All right, so we are back with another edition of Inside Launch Street and another book review. Although I got to be honest, I don't know if book review is the right way to describe it. I feel like we use the books to springboard the conversation, but it's not the only thing. It's not like a traditional book club book review.
Right, totally. Yeah, it was more an excuse to talk about and focus on principles and exciting things. Right, it's a springboard into some very cool ideas, and iron sharpens iron. So yeah.
And it's kind of funny because we weren't recording prior, though I kind of wish we were. But you and I were hashing out because we're talking about strategy today, good strategy and bad strategy, which is the name of one of the books we're going to talk about. But we were hashing out a bunch of stuff on the whiteboard, and I was like, I almost wish we were recording this part of it too, because we kind of did a little brainstorming session, kind of just even to get ready. So for those of you listening on Launch Street, this is the second of our springboard to the million things that we care about. The first one was about the primal mind, which was fantastic. We got great feedback on it, not just because of the books we reviewed, but just how you and I broke down how the brain impacts how we operate and the decisions we make, and kind of how you, as you and I both talk about the bouncer of the brain, how to push that dude aside and get on that VIP, right? So today we're going to talk about strategy, because I think you and I both we've been in business a long time between the two of us.
Hey, I don't know about that.
And I think we have experienced a lot of bad strategy and a lot of bullshit around strategy. And we wanted to kind of break that down because I think that's essential to grow, not just from a business level, but also from a personal level. But before we do that, let's introduce ourselves for anyone who doesn't know us. So Derrick, I'll start with you because some of you people should know who I am. You've been listening for a while.
Right. My name's Derrick, Derrick Kuhn, and I am founder of a company called Brillity Digital. We are growth specialists that leverage digital platforms, right? We do digital marketing and strategy in a real way. There's a lot of things, as you mentioned, that masquerade as that.
Yeah.
And so our goal is to help businesses grow in the direction they want, using all the tools and the most effective tools, really, to do that as fast as possible.
I love it. So, and I'm Tamara Gondor, and I own Launch Street. And basically, we help people unlock their full potential through the power of innovation. And through that, we help them innovate and win in today's insanely crazy, cluttered, dynamic, complex, everything I can probably think of marketplace. And we do that for individuals, but we also do it for teams and companies that are trying to compete and win. So that's the perspective that we're both coming from. And so, Derrick and I tend to meet regularly and we swap books. In fact, he just gave me a new one today that I'm super excited to read. And it's like, it is so big. I think I'm going to have to find like a table just for it in my house because it's so heavy. But we swap books a lot and we have a lot of discussions around what we're learning. And I think you really inspired me to read more and to get back into it. And it's funny, since we kind of started doing this, I found that my new routine has been when I get up in the morning, if I'm not working out, is just opening up, like getting coffee, obviously.
Nice, of course, essential. I beat it.
Always, right. I mean,
mainline that.
Right. I should just have it ready next to my bed. But actually getting up and then reading for an hour before I even start working. And it's like 4:30 in the morning, so nobody's looking for me anyway.
When you're free time, right?
So I'm curious, so actually before we dig into this, do you read? When do you read? Like, when do you find the time?
Every chance I get would be the easy answer. And I find there's two aspects to how I consume and how I read. The main point is you got to be intentional, right? A lot of times how I used to consume books were just sort of take everything on faith that this guy knew what he was talking about, right? But as we've talked about, there are key principles in these books that if you can line them up against others, you assemble something useful. So it's I target very specific books, but they're not necessarily reading them the whole way through. And so how I do that, every morning I get up, I work out for about 2.5 hours. So it used to be I would read 2/3 and listen. Now I've shifted to Audible as my primary tool.
For all of it.
For almost all of it. But the key to that is I will jot notes down, take clips, and then circle back and process it. So synthesizing the information that's consumed under that directed learning mindset, it allows Audible to work very well for me versus normally I prefer to read, but that time is much harder to find. I read a physical book or a Kindle, but the audio is more accessible so long as you capture things to then go back and synthesize and process later.
It's interesting. So here's my question on that. So I love physical books because I love to take notes. I think I was showing you what I do is I have my little clipboard with my notepad. I write down notes because writing, I used to type to try to be faster, but then I'm not actually absorbing what I'm reading, and I actually write down too much. It's almost like just verbatim shit.
It's transcribing.
Yeah, it's transcribing, right, exactly. Right. Versus now where I take notes, but then I take a picture of those notes and put them on the drive. So because I used to have all this pressure to type up my notes, but I never did.
Right.
So that's how I work, but I love Audible. So sometimes if I have a book that I love, I'll actually read it and then I'll also listen to it and I'll jump around in the Audible. But how do you take notes on Audible? Because that's the one thing I haven't figured out. I love the physical book. Now I also realize that when I travel, carrying 4 physical books with me is really annoying for me.
Right. Exactly. So, very, you look a little strange.
Oh my God, I'm like the bag lady. Right. It's ridiculous.
Yeah. So first of all, I'm writing because of the multi-sensory experience of writing. You feel and that actually
you internalize what you're actually learning.
18% lift over typed because when you are typing, you are transcribing, so you're not processing, synthesizing, and then putting down the key elements. So
I learned that lesson the hard way.
So how I handle that is I will there's a little clip function where you can put notes in on Audible. I'll often screenshot the time. So I can go back to it when I'm later, and then I can quickly connect what I was doing. And I think there's something to it. One of the reasons procrastination is good, if you open a project and then you allow that to incubate and sort of you cook on it over time, well, when I listen to it, and then I get back to circling around, I've had a chance to sort of filter some of the day stuff through it. So that helps me do it. So it's a combination of capturing and marking. But the key is the circling back. Otherwise, and how I use Audible, usually I will, if I find it's a screening device. So I listen to a lot of books, and then if I like it, I buy a physical copy and I buy a Kindle edition.
Right. That's
so
kind of what I do too.
Crazy, right? So I have these multiple points because Kindle's easier to search. But the recall and the processing, a physical book is great because you can flip back and forth, have a couple open. But the problem with that is that time is limited. So I use the other methods to screen and prepare for that time.
Well, one of the things that I've started doing too is I didn't realize about the clips in Audible. So that's great because I don't know if it's unlimited credits, but I love Audible. Right. And I do the same thing. When I find a book I love, I tend to get it in multiple forms because I want it to be accessible. And sometimes for me, like if I loved a chapter, I'll actually then go listen to the chapter again in Audible because it just helps it all, to your point about procrastination, sink in. But where was I headed with that? I totally lost my train of thought. It was visual. It had to do with note taking.
Yeah, I mean, how do we work this into our day? How do we?
Yeah. Okay, thank you. I was like, oh,
yeah. So what you were saying,
where are my keys, Derrick? It is what I have forced myself into is also making reading part of my actual work and not my extracurricular activity, because that's where I really was falling short. Because when it wasn't an expectation of my job to improve, it never happened.
Exactly.
And so, and not that I get what you're saying about Audible and with the clips, I think that's a little bit game changing for a lot of people, but I also think it's important that whether we're listening to it or reading it or whatever strategy we're using, that we're actually making it something that's mandatory. And I would argue, and I would love your perspective on this for you, but I find that our book club, has forced me to really up my game. Or I should say allowed me, not forced. It has allowed me to up my game in surprising ways because I'm trying to we have deadlines, right? Like we have a podcast recording, so I got to make sure I've read all the books and take my notes. But the translation into my work and life has been phenomenal, and I didn't expect it. But I think it's because we discuss it, so we're not just reading a book and putting it on a shelf. It's like, what did we gain out of it? What are we going to do about it? And that has changed everything, actually. Right.
Yeah. It's that intent to synthesize and develop your own body of knowledge. And I think the key thing is, giving yourself permission that it's not an after hours thing. I mean, we get paid and provide great value from brains, not brawn. And you are an incredibly hard worker. So am I. The default oftentimes is to just crush through tasks versus finding and honing a key principle or understanding that then cascades and changes everything and has a massive impact on people around you. So once that gets linked up, which the way to do that is to consume it, but then to synthesize and implement. And that is, once you get that dynamic handled, then reading becomes one of the highest things you can do to further your professional life. And then that obviously cascades into personal as well. So.
Yeah, it's fantastic. And I hope one day, I have my book coming out in May. One day you'll have your book coming out. When you put pen to paper, that other people are having these discussions about the stuff that we do. And in fact, I hope they're doing this after the podcast too, right? Because it doesn't have to be, it's almost more of a growth club because we bring in so much stuff. It doesn't have to be books, right? It can be whatever. So let's parlay that into the conversation we want to have today, which is about strategy. And I from my perspective, one of the reasons I wanted to have this conversation is it both being on the side of being a business owner, but also having been a leader inside companies too and working for others, the impact of bad strategy is massive. And I think both in a couple places, one is obvious and one isn't. It is obvious in the sense that it doesn't work. Right. It becomes lip service. It doesn't mean anything to anyone, right? It never gets implemented. But I actually think there's a more insidious impact that we don't realize, which is the missed growth and the missed opportunities because of that strategy. So if you're mildly successful, you can hide behind that. Right. And you don't even know what the fuck you're missing. Right. For companies like ours who are smaller, successful, but smaller, we feel it greatly. Right. But I think in a lot of ways that impact gets missed because it's a future opportunity that you didn't have to begin with. Right. But strategy, I mean, don't you find it's like innovation, it's like marketing. Right. It's like these words that get thrown around, but nobody Like, I love our listeners right now. If I asked all listeners to just text me, what do you mean by strategy?
Mm-hmm. Right.
I'd love to see what those responses are, because I think they're all over the place.
Right, exactly. It's that...
and it's bad training. It's nobody's fault, right? It's bad training.
Right, exactly. And it's common vernacular. It's how people start thinking about it. And then that's obviously everyone is trying to separate themselves and sound smarter than someone else. So they bandy these words around, which is really annoying. Strategy has so many different labels and so many misunderstandings. It's beyond bad strategy. It's actually not strategy, but masquerading as strategy. And that...
Give me an example of that.
So, so we, did a lot of work for UC Health, and they were talking about their strategy for, the next year. So we met and with their CMO, and these strategies were just giant goals. And like, they had number projections that they're making up based on the past year.
It's like
the future.
Right. It's like an Excel spreadsheet where they curved it forward and said, based on 10 years of growth, this is our goal for next year, and that became strategy.
And that literally has nothing. That is not.
It doesn't tell you how to get there.
That doesn't tell you how to get it. That is an objective or a goal, part of a strategy, but not a strategy.
Right.
The other thing I've seen that's a huge issue with strategy is you get these ivory tower people who are so disconnected from reality of what is the actual market and business dynamics that they make these sweeping statements like, we need to have world-class customer service. Without any concept, that is not a strategy if you don't have some implementation plan that you can measure and that you can move the needle on. So bad strategy is mostly mislabeling strategy and then running around like you have something that's effective. And I have seen, especially in big companies, they have this momentum from really good strategy earlier on that's just carrying them. So, and then, human biases, we want to stick with what we know works. So it's very hard to break from the mold of what is on the surface successful, but is actually from a previous strategy that was effective. And they're just, without understanding those dynamics, they're riding that wave. So there's a lot of forces at work, adding in the complexity of the world that people want. They want to feel comfortable. They want their story to, like, so they can go to bed at night and get up. But it isn't helpful, and it leads to some really bad decisions, but mostly missed opportunity. Yeah,
well, that's why I think it's almost, it's not necessarily invisible, but it's subtle, right? Because you don't know what you don't know at that point. And so interesting, you were talking about you kind of carry forward last year's strategy, right? So we have a longevity preference in our brains. So there are these studies done, and hopefully I got the numbers right here, but the point is the same, where they did these tests and they said to two groups of consumer people, they presented people with two chocolates. Chocolate 1 had been around for 3 years. Chocolate 2 started being sold 73 years ago, right? Basically.
Same chocolate, though.
Same chocolate, yeah. Which one's better? And inevitably people pick the old one because in their mind, it had been around for a long time. So to your point about strategy, we have this bias towards what we think longevity makes it valid.
Right, exactly.
Right? So yet on the flip side, we also know that what made you successful yesterday makes you obsolete tomorrow. So it's this tough balance between I like what I know and what I'm comfortable with, and our brains are wired to prefer things that have been around for a while, versus the unknown, the new, the kind of all that kind of stuff. And I think to your point, one of the mistakes we make around strategy is we gravitate towards the old without recognizing the dynamics that we're in today, because that strategy could have really worked, but the dynamics are different.
That's exactly right. And a lot of times it happens, I don't really want to use the word luck, but fortuitous circumstances where they're not even really clear why they had the past success. But they got it, and so that so it's really dangerous. Misattribution bias, another thing. We want to tend to associate success with the stuff we did or we controlled, but without a written and clarified and clear strategy, you really don't know what to attribute to what's working. So you have this sort of folklore that gets passed on. It becomes platitudes, and everyone feels good, but you are waiting for a fall. On the other side of that, you have someone like Steve Jobs who saw opportunity. His strategy he executed it repeatedly, right? Look to where the market is going and what's missing and strike. And even if something's successful, don't wait on that. Don't rest on that. Be hunting the next evolution. And so his strategy worked repeatedly in multiple domains.
But what's interesting about that, though, is his strategy is always future looking.
Right.
Where most strategies are actually backwards.
Right.
Someone said to me, I was interviewing someone for the podcast, I think it was yesterday, the day before, and days blend together. I don't even know what day it is.
It's one long day.
I don't know. Life is like one day. Totally. But he said facts are for the past. That's the fundamental problem with facts. And he was talking about fact. We were talking about intuition versus facts. So it was in the context of facts are in the past, feelings are in the future.
Right.
So which to our point about strategy, right? Like strategy often is past driven. And that's why books like Good to Great drive me crazy.
Right.
Because the whole thing is, it's accurate if you're looking historically. Right. But if you use it as a blueprint for strategy moving forward, you're going to fail. I mean, frankly, half of the case studies in there are irrelevant or out of business.
Oh, yeah.
So, sorry, Jim Collins, but it drives me a little crazy.
Right. Hindsight is what? 2020, right? It's easy. And the problem there is you're reverse engineering what may have caused a success as well. Right. May have, right? And so any good scientific method is based on the probability to predict the future. So a hypothesis, a working theory is similar to a strategy, and it should be able to predict future behavior, which means you have to account not just for the facts, but for the trend lines, the momentum, and the changing dynamics. Without that, any kind of set checklist of here's what you need to be good to great is completely ineffective because it is not customized to the specific market trends and dynamics. It is looking at, these guys did this, therefore I should do that.
But I want to push back a second on looking too heavily at trends and where everything is headed. You and I have had this conversation before. You can only guess so far, right? Like that's the other challenge with strategies. People want to create a 5-year strategy plan because the trends are headed this way. And I don't disagree that you can look at trends and see where things are going. Like we can see that more people are living their lives on mobile and that's going to increase. We can see that people's streaming preferences are changing, shopping preferences, right? Like retail is feeling that. But as a business or a leader to spend your time thinking you have a plan that's going to last 5 years.
It's ridiculous, right?
Right. So that's where I have this kind of like
totally agree.
Hesitation and love of trends and where it's headed because it's not a guarantee.
No, and we live in the digital space, and that it makes me funny. I was giving a presentation, and I was supposed to put the 5-year plan, and I put a big picture of Mike Tyson. He said, "Everyone has a plan."
It's my favorite quote.
Yeah, everyone has a plan until they get punched in the face. I feel
love it.
Maybe the better word is the dynamics of the marketplace instead of the trends. Right? It's more about what is evolving. And when there's an open system, which is business and life, then you have closed systems like, let's say, health, fitness, or sport. When you have a closed system, you can optimize around the knowns. The problem with open systems
which is life, right?
Which is life and business.
Yeah.
Right? There are so many things outside of the known constraints and the known challenges that it is impossible, other than in a principle-based way, to forecast into the future. So that to me is you're great. Trends is definitely not the right word, but current market dynamics and in the good strategy, bad strategy, the guy has a fundamental principle that we use all the time, which is what is your proximate objective?
Yeah.
So and that means what is a close range target that when you get to it, you will have a different. You can reassess and then map your plan forward. And the great example is before everyone had Google Maps and all this. When you were going westward as a planner, when you got to a certain hill, you would see the different landscape. So why plan past that hill other than in just some fundamental ways? You have to get to the next objective, from which point clarity will be achieved, and then you can pick your next path forward. That allows you to focus on real targets that aren't too far off, and then allows flux you have a plan for the changing dynamics as well as what you see once you get to that next objective.
Right. And I think the key in what you're saying there is the proximate objectives isn't about hitting your goal and having cake or feeling like a failure.
Right.
The proximate objectives help you determine if you're headed in the right direction and what you need to do next.
Right.
And that's a fundamental difference. That's fundamentally different than I want to hit a goal. Right.
Exactly.
So like our proximate objectives at Launch Street are about understanding our progress,
right,
or lack of progress.
Right.
And let me back up for a second and say that there's 2 books that I think both Derrick and I really appreciated. that kind of have sparked this conversation. And then a lot of books that we didn't like. But the two that we really liked were Good Strategy, Bad Strategy. What's the guy's name? I can't remember. Richard Rummelt. Rummelt. And Rocket Fuel, which is by Gino Wickman and Mark Winters. So let me tell you why I liked them, and then Derrick, I'd like to hear why you liked them. So Good Strategy, Bad Strategy, and we're going to dig a lot into this. And in fact, just for listeners so you know, we're going to actually break down the key issues and the strategy, and that'll all make sense on both of our businesses, for Launch Street and for Brillity, and we're going to kind of pick them apart a little bit. Right. So to use us as real examples so that for you listening can actually think about how to apply this to your world. And obviously I would get these two books because I thought they were really good. I liked both of them because I felt like they were the first ones that I could actually see how to apply strategy beyond platitudes. Right. So that's why I like them. I also thought that the Good Strategy, Bad Strategy in particular, how do I say this? I hadn't really thought about how to articulate this. It made the most sense. I don't know. Like it wasn't complicated. It wasn't. The way he delivers it with proximate objectives and diagnosis and the things we're about to talk about made me realize, God, that really makes sense. Of course, I should diagnose before I do strategy. But every other book I'd read was like, figure out the trends, look to the future, do the data lines, and ta-da, there's strategy, right? And so for that reason, I like that. I thought Rocket Fuel was really good because it helped me understand the role of people within that strategy, as well as the strategy itself.
Yeah, no, I love it. Yeah, Rocket Fuel is part of the EOS Entrepreneurial Operating System framework, and it has sort of a pre-wired strategy built into it. I found it incredibly helpful in my business because identifying the key issues, it has a complete vetted plan for a section of a certain type of entrepreneur. And I would agree, Good Strategy, Bad Strategy is it's great because it provides a principled methodology to create your own strategies. Right? And one of the things we do for every client is what we call an adaptive strategy. And so we have used this framework 1,000+ times, and it's vetted. So the problem with a lot of other strategy books are they're either explaining what worked here. And so, yes, you see the strategy. It's backwards case study, right? And so, there's some great books that go through all these different examples of strategies that worked and were interesting and all that stuff, but they don't allow you to implement that in any real way. So, and then you have the other strategy books that are for gigantic companies. Like I was reading about Procter and Gamble's strategy. They're saying, oh, well, we just spent 10,000 here, $1 million over here. That's there's a subset of assumptions in there that doesn't scale. So it doesn't really allow you, unless you happen to be in that situation. Again, it's still a framework, but the assumptions of the framework provided are not attainable by most people. Therefore, it's not good strategy. So this, especially the first third of Good Strategy, Bad Strategy, where he lays out the kernel of a good strategy. And where he got me is, one of the first key move in any strategy is a proper diagnosis. And, one of our clients for many years was UC Health. We did all their digital marketing. So I got to experience a lot of how doctors work. And it doesn't matter if you are the best neurosurgeon in the world. If you get the wrong diagnosis and you do that procedure based on that diagnosis, it doesn't matter how good you are on the other side. You are going to miss the boat and that person's still going to be sick or hurt or whatever. So like proximate objectives, the stuff in there is principled and makes sense. And most importantly, you can use the next day once you get it.
Right. And I think what made the fundamental difference for me after reading these and having our discussions is that when I started to dig into things like the diagnosis, like what's the reality of the situation, what are our key issues,
right?
It opened up my eyes to what really needed to happen to get to the next level. And I think that originally what I would have done is my strategy would have been to hit X dollars in revenue,
right,
or sell X dollars of assessments, or X number of assessments, or like any one of those things, or beat blah, 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 right, company, right?
You love that. Yeah, not competitive at all.
No, not in any way. There are people out there who I'm coming for and they have no idea.
Yeah.
They don't know.
I feel sorry for them.
Well, it's just my own personal way of staying motivated, right? But this, and we'll break it down when we talk about our businesses, but this allowed me a framework for putting inputs that make sense. So like in innovation, we always talk about your answers are only good as your questions.
Right.
And oftentimes we're asking the wrong questions. So the idea that strategy was missing the questions and the diagnosis really spoke to me and changed how I thought about strategy, and has given me a clearer view of also what then needs to be done tactically, because without a good strategy, the tactics are like, if and this is by no means based on reality, this is just me coming up with something. If I'm a rental car agency and I'm the second or third in the world, I'm not number one, I could envision a bad strategy being like beat number one or like X number of cars out there or whatever. But that doesn't tell you, you can't trickle that out across your departments and people.
That's exactly right. You know, that again, that could be a fine objective, but a strategy has got to address those key issues and paint a path forward that it has a methodology built in that allows that action plan to be prioritized and identified so that it then can flow to the strategy to get you to the objective. Without a doubt, I think that the key point for me was in there is when you do the proper diagnosis, that action plan then can address all of the issues that stand between you and that. So people love, there's a real problem in humans. They sort of go into two groups. You get the people that have analysis paralysis. They just want to think about it. And in their defense, there's a million things to think about.
Right.
And so
but it's a rabbit hole.
It's a rabbit hole, right? And then you have the people that are action biased, which I tend to fall in that camp. Like, I want to spring into action because at least we're getting something done. Like, quit talking and let's do it.
Yeah.
So the way that the way that he approaches it is you have to, you get the big picture, which are all the challenges, but what he provides and is what you're talking about is a method to sort through those to get to the root issues. So he calls them the key issues. Once you have those identified, now you can start to build a plan to get into action. And without that, if you don't have something to sift through all of what's coming on within your business, your competitors, the marketplace, technology, the global economy, there's a lot there. So trying to figure out those all equally, paralyzes people. And the usual response I see is, well, let's just either keep doing what we did because that's too hard to figure out, or spring into action and hope that some of the stuff will work and some won't.
I have so many questions right now. Wait, I have to back up for a second. Here's the thing I want us to talk about next that I think will be helpful, because you and I have now mentioned proper diagnosis multiple times. Yep. And if I'm listening, I'm thinking to myself, well, how do I do a proper diagnosis? So I think the easiest way for us to do that is to share examples.
Yep.
So I say we dig in, and we can start with yours or mine. It doesn't matter to me. Let's start with yours. So first, let's talk about how to do a proper diagnosis, because much like, we were talking about earlier, and I think it's kind of common now, is like the difference between practice and deliberate practice. Like I could throw the football for 8 hours a day and I will still never be Tom Brady. Right? So the difference between us, aside from the fact he's 6'3" or whatever, 5'8", all the other things, but really truly, right, is that he has deliberate practice, right? He is practicing very intentionally with the right set of skills and tools and coaching to actually improve versus just practicing. There's a fundamental difference between the two.
100%.
Right. And it's been proven that people who are successful at whatever it is they're doing have deliberate practice, right? Two very different things. So that laddering back to diagnosis, let's talk about like, how do you sift through all the shit, right? Because we're inundated with information. So how do you think about getting to the things that are actually the right things to think about? And then, like I said, and then I want to use your company as the example.
Right. So I think your deliberate practice versus normal practice is a great starting point, because the idea behind deliberate practice is targeting the key aspects of your performance that, if they get addressed and improved, have the largest impact on his performance. So it may be where he grips the ball, it may be turning the hips. Right. But the only way to determine that is to understand the mechanics of what he's attempting to do, and then specifically address his challenges that he needs to target to overcome, which is why people hate deliberate practice. It is usually about working through something that isn't the way you've done it, but that needs to be improved. So, again, back to the neurosurgeon example, if you do not diagnose the correct things to work on, that effort is wasted. And do we have time to waste? absolutely not. Right. So how we would do it, we, technologies, there's a million things to consider when you first do it. And again, you have to give the space and time to do this. We were talking about synthesizing books. The strategy is not something that is static. That's why I added for our company, adaptive strategy is our thinking, is not static. But the first move and most important is you have to identify all the challenges. So first identify your objective, right? If you want to do this XYZ thing, but then what are all the issues that are related that get in the way of that are either opportunities or challenges? An easy one for us would be, digital marketing. Technology changes all the time. Right? Yeah. And because technology is changing, it transforms businesses. Facebook is developing at an incredible rate. So is Amazon. So is Google. So that's an easy one. Another issue is technology is hard to understand. Business owners, marketing managers are loaded, right? They have so much to do, not enough time to do it. And the critical thinking to be able to sort this out is just beyond their realm and their ability, time-wise and background-wise. So the first move we make for our clients and for ourselves is to list all of the issues. So the next part is where the genius comes in. And I would use, a doctor example is they key in on what are of all the things you're talking about, there are some triggers. And those things you pull out, and we call those the key issues, which is the first move, is to identify those key issues. With what you do in innovation, I think it is spot on. And innovative thinking is first asking the right questions amongst all the challenges and opportunities, and then pulling out and distilling the essence. So for us, the specific example, we boiled it down to 4 primary key issues amongst the thousands we had written down to inform our core strategy. So the first one is, we call it, if you have a hammer. And, if you, in technology, people tend to be very biased towards what they know. If you have a hammer, everything is what?
A nail. Yeah.
Right. So if you're a guy who's good at search engine optimization, how do you solve all the problems?
Search engine optimization.
Right. If you are a mobile app developer and you're asked, do you need a mobile app? What would you say? Of course you do. My baby needs new shoes, right? Right. My wife wants to go on vacation, right? So there's a key issue in our space is that technologists tend to favor what they know and use, and that unavoidably influences their ability to help a client and be the right choice on what to use and when. So that's key issue 1. Yeah. The key issue number 2 is that we have, I mentioned already, technology is changing all the time, and you need to have a focus on what is important out there, and you have to be sitting. So you have to account for that in any strategy.
It's always changing.
It's always changing, right? And it's interesting because one change cascades across multiple platforms, and that's huge, right? Way back in the day, my joke is, in technology, it's like dog years. 1 year in technology is 10 years, right? Totally. So I have thousands of years of experience, right? But
you're like an ancient Yoda.
I'm an ancient Yoda, right? Hopefully, better looking. So that's a key issue. The next one is our clients they will talk about what we do as a black art or a black box. It's very confusing, and there's a lot of snake oil sales out there, promises that can't be verified. It's very complicated. So there's a fear in the marketplace around what we do and understanding what we do, and there's a massive distrust. So we need to account for that and how we engage and how we communicate.
So, and then I think the one that you kind of blended into Black Magic was actually different, because we were talking about it earlier, is that confusion and disconnect between technology and not technology, right? So what's that about?
Yeah, no, so thank you for that. So
that's why we map it out ahead of time.
Yeah, I know, right? Because otherwise I get everywhere, right? No, thanks for that. Yeah, so my first company in technology was founded in 2001, and I saw this very rapidly that technology-oriented people they prefer to sit behind a laptop and send an email. They have different social skills and orientation, and they talk in a totally foreign language, right? And so they're just
You know, do you remember the movie Office Space? And there was a guy, and they're like, what do you do here? And he's like, I'm a people person. And he's like, I connect the engineers to the customers.
Right.
Like, but that's in some ways based on reality that people who tend to be very, and I'd say for the younger generations too, I'm a Gen Xer, right? So they tend to be less relationship driven and more like do the work tech behind the screen driven.
Right. Exactly. Exactly.
Interesting. Yeah.
Yeah. And so, you get business owners or executives, these guys are completely disconnected from the people who can do the work. So there's yawning divide between those who understand technology and then those who understand business, and both are scratching their head and more than a few curse words on both sides.
Right.
So we, when we identified the key issues, this became a huge one, because you can do the greatest work, but if the client is confused and disconnected, we're not talking their language, there's breakdowns everywhere.
So let me just sum them up for a second, because they're also interesting. And one of the reasons why I want to sum it up is what's interesting to me about the key issues, and you'll see it on my side when I go on mine too, I think, is that they're not just we have X dollars in revenue and we want to get to X, Y, or we have X number of people and we want to get to Y. It is really the fundamental issues in the business that could optimize and or hinder your ability to succeed and get to the next place.
That's right.
And would you say that then the key, what's important about the diagnosis isn't just it could be more internal, like you and I happen to be in places where the issues that we're facing are external, that our companies are battling against.
Right.
For other people, and I think there's some examples in the book where the key issues are actually internal as well. So ours are external because of the place we're at.
Right.
But for others, it could be internal.
That's right.
Like operationally, they're a hot mess. You know, or there's no communication between departments or whatever.
Right. Exactly. And like we always, when we diagnose key issues for our clients, there's always a line like, this client, it has nothing to do with the marketplace, the growth, the technology. It's like this client is very demanding. Let's say, or asks questions.
You can't see it on the podcast, but he's looking directly at me.
That's right. So, it's a comprehensive book. The final key issue, and it's not just challenges, it is also where it informs the rest of how you move in your space. And it's the big friction points too. So one way to think about friction, it's either friction or opportunity. So the last key point, we try to keep them between 4 and 7 to force distillation. That's an arbitrary number, but you don't want to have so many you then don't have them prioritized. But the last and most critical issue, opportunity, on the opportunity side, is digital provides the most cost-effective, most powerful mechanism to grow the majority of companies. Right. And because of these disconnects, they are sitting
the
on
key issues.
Because of all the things we talked about, the confusion, the dynamics, you have the hammer is in the nail. All of these things confound a literal treasure trove for most clients. So another key issue that informs everything is that we have a properly executed digital marketing is the fastest, most powerful growth mechanism for companies that they can use to grow the way they want because of the targeting and all of this stuff. So that assembled the core of the issues and opportunities. So the diagnosis boiled down to those things.
So hold on, I'm going to add one that I think we missed. It's on both of ours, and which I think greatly is informing your strategy, which we'll talk about in a minute. So those things were external, but you do have an internal one, and I have an internal key issue that needs to be.
Oh, sure. That's a good point.
That we need to get ahead of.
Yep.
So you and I are the ones in our businesses who are on the forefront of shifting the narrative and creating the new model in our businesses. What you and I are facing is needing to make sure that we systematize that knowledge so that our teams can implement it to the same level or to a high level for all our clients.
Right.
So that is, I think, for you and for me, actually, is the key issue that we forgot when we were mapping all this stuff out. Because I do think that informs where you're headed.
Right.
But that's the internal key issue that you're dealing with.
Right. That's right. No, that's great. The key issue is delivering high value in this industry is difficult to scale and maintain that quality, especially with the dynamics you set.
Well, and especially because I think, this is true for both of us, but let's focus on you for a second. In the digital marketing space, you're trying to you're bringing in a different method that is not the black magic hammer, right?
Exactly, right.
So, and in order to do that successfully, your teams need to have a system that allows them to do that, right? So, and as we grow and as Brillity, you're in the like experiencing tremendous growth for great reason, right? Like you have your eye on, that's part of the diagnosis. You have your eye on making sure your teams have that. So I didn't want to miss, as you were talking, I was like, hey, we missed one.
Right, exactly. Yeah. Right. And again, especially recently, we've had tremendous growth. And this is why going back through and diagnosing very frequently, you pull out key issues that have emerged, right? Now that we have this amazing...
Well, that's because of where you are, right? Like you didn't have that 2 years ago. You were in the same place.
I mean, even 6 months ago, like how we've leveled up in the last 6 months, a new key issue has emerged, which is scaling what has been incredibly successful in the past for us that got us this growth needs to be addressed in our strategy because we are hitting capacity at the way we're doing. Not yet, and we have active strategy against it. But you're right, pulling that out.
Well, it's a proactive issue to deal with. It's not that you've fallen behind, but if you don't deal with that, right, you will.
Well, and it's identifying the key dynamics, and that is certainly one.
Yeah.
So that's a great.
Okay, so to sum them up: hammer, dynamic change, confusion, disconnect, black magic, and scaling. Or I don't want to say scaling Derrick's way, but like systematizing the approach.
Yeah, right. Systematizing the delivering the same value at a larger scale is the key issue. Right.
Okay.
And that needs to be addressed in our strategy elements.
Thanks for hanging with us on Inside Launch Street. If you know someone that is truly ready to unlock their innovation advantage, have them join you on Launch Street. Discover your innovation advantage. Build a team of high-performing innovators and ignite ideas and solutions that create massive impact. GOTO, launchstreet.com. Remember, innovators, if you don't take the leap, somebody else will.